Welcome to our channel with a new adventure about Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. was one of the most prominent leaders in the American civil rights movement, remembered for his nonviolent approach to fighting racial inequality. Born on January 15, 1929, in Atlanta, Georgia, King was raised in a family steeped in faith and activism. His father, Martin Luther King Sr., was a Baptist minister and a strong advocate for racial equality, which deeply influenced the young King. Number 1. Early life and education. King grew up in a racially segregated society in the South, witnessing firsthand the harsh realities of racism, discrimination, and segregation. Despite these challenges, King excelled in school. He attended Booker T. Washington High School in Atlanta, skipping 2 grades before entering Morehouse College at the age of 15. His time at Morehouse was transformative, and it was there that he decided to follow in his father's footsteps and pursue the ministry. In 1948, King graduated from Morehouse with a degree in sociology. He then enrolled at Crozer Theological Seminary in Pennsylvania, where he earned a Bachelor of Divinity degree in 1951. King's academic journey did not stop there. He pursued a doctorate at Boston University, where he earned his PhD in systematic theology in 1955. During his time in Boston, he met Coretta Scott, a talented singer and intellectual. They married in 1953 and would later have 4 children: Yolanda, Martin Luther King III, Dexter, and Bernice. Number 2. Rise to leadership. Montgomery bus boycott. King's entry into the national spotlight came in 1955 with the Montgomery bus boycott. The boycott was sparked by the arrest of Rosa Parks, an African-American woman who refused to give up her seat on a segregated bus to a white passenger. The boycott, organized by local leaders including E.D. Nixon and Joanne Robinson, lasted for over a year, from December 5, 1955 to December 20, 1956. As a young pastor at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama, King was chosen to lead the Montgomery Improvement Association, which coordinated the boycott. The boycott brought King to national prominence as a leader of the burgeoning civil rights movement. His philosophy of nonviolent resistance, inspired by Mahatma Gandhi, became the cornerstone of his activism. The boycott ended with a major victory when the Supreme Court ruled that segregation on public buses was unconstitutional. Number 3. Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC. In 1957, King helped found the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, ASCLC, an organization that aimed to harness the power of Black churches to fight for civil rights. As the president of the SCLC, King traveled the country giving speeches, organizing protests, and meeting with political leaders to press for racial equality. King's vision extended beyond just ending segregation. He sought to combat the deep-rooted economic inequality and disenfranchisement that African Americans faced. He believed that true freedom for Black people could not be achieved without addressing the systemic barriers that kept them in poverty. Number 4. The March on Washington and I Have a Dream. King's leadership reached its peak on August 28, 1963, during the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. The march drew more than 250,000 people to the Lincoln Memorial, making it one of the largest political rallies in U.S. history. It was here that King delivered his famous I Have a Dream speech, which called for an end to racism and envisioned a future where people would be judged by the content of their character rather than the color of their skin. The speech, with its powerful and poetic imagery, solidified King's role as the moral leader of the civil rights movement. His words resonated not just with African Americans, but with millions of Americans who supported the movement for justice and equality. Number 5. Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act. King's activism played a significant role in the passage of landmark legislation that dismantled institutionalized racism. His leadership was instrumental in the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibited discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. That same year, at the age of 35, King became the youngest person to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. In 1965, King and other civil rights leaders turned their attention to voting rights. Despite the passage of the 15th Amendment in 1870, many Southern states had enacted laws and used intimidation to prevent African Americans from voting. King led the Selma to Montgomery marches in March 1965 to demand voting rights for Black citizens. The brutal response of state troopers, who attacked peaceful marchers on Bloody Sunday, shocked the nation and increased support for the cause. The marches ultimately contributed to the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which outlawed discriminatory voting practices. Number 6. Expanding the movement, opposition to the Vietnam War, and economic justice. By the mid-1960s, King began to expand his focus beyond civil rights to include opposition to the Vietnam War and the fight for economic justice. He believed that the war was unjust and disproportionately affected poor Americans, especially African Americans. King's stance against the war, articulated in a 1967 speech titled "Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence," drew criticism from political leaders and even some civil rights allies, but he remained firm in his convictions. At the same time, King was working on a campaign to address poverty in America. He called for a Poor People's Campaign, aiming to bring attention to economic inequalities and to pressure the government to take action to address poverty. King believed that true equality could not be achieved until the economic system was fundamentally changed to be more just and equitable for all Americans, regardless of race. Number 7. Assassination and Legacy. In 1968, King was in the midst of planning the Poor People's Campaign when he traveled to Memphis, Tennessee, to support striking sanitation workers who were demanding better wages and working conditions. On April 3, 1968, King delivered what would be his final speech, known as the "I've Been to the Mountaintop" speech, at the Mason Temple. In this prophetic speech, he spoke about the threats to his life and the possibility of not living long enough to see the movement's ultimate victory, but he expressed his faith that justice would prevail. The following day, on April 4, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated while standing on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis. He was shot by James Earl Ray, a fugitive and career criminal who had been stalking King. King's assassination shocked the world and led to widespread mourning. Riots broke out in major cities across the United States as African Americans expressed their grief and anger at the loss of their leader. King's funeral was held on April 9, 1968 in Atlanta, and he was laid to rest at Southview Cemetery. His legacy endures as a symbol of peace, justice, and moral courage. His work paved the way for subsequent generations to continue the fight for civil rights and equality. Number 8. Posthumous Recognition and Impact. King's impact on American society and the world is immeasurable. In the years following his death, his ideas about nonviolence, racial equality, and social justice have continued to inspire movements for change. In 1983, President Ronald Reagan signed a bill creating a national holiday in honor of Martin Luther King Jr., which is observed annually on the third Monday of January. King's philosophy of nonviolent resistance and his tireless pursuit of justice continue to influence modern movements for civil rights, both in the United States and around the world. His dream of a society free from racial prejudice and economic inequality remains a powerful vision for those working to build a better, more just future. After Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination in 1968, his legacy only grew more significant, with his life and work becoming a symbol for equality, justice, and peace. The civil rights movement he helped lead continued to press for social change, and his influence shaped the course of American history long after his death. Number 9. Immediate aftermath of his death. In the wake of King's assassination, the United States experienced widespread unrest. The days following his death saw riots erupt in over 100 cities, including Washington, D.C., Chicago, Baltimore, and Detroit, as grief, frustration, and anger boiled over. African Americans and supporters of the movement were heartbroken. fearing the loss of King might derail the progress made in the fight for civil rights. However, in the midst of the turmoil, King's death galvanized support for his ideas. Many people, both black and white, who had previously been indifferent or opposed to the civil rights movement, were moved by the tragedy to reflect on the importance of King's work. In a nation still deeply divided by race, many leaders began to call for reconciliation and renewed commitment to nonviolence and equality. King's assassination also intensified efforts to complete the work he had begun. For instance, the Fair Housing Act of 1968, which banned discrimination in housing based on race, color, religion, or national origin, was passed just days after King's death. President Lyndon B. Johnson invoked King's memory in calling for the bill's passage, a testament to the profound impact King's leadership had on American politics. Number 10. The Poor People's Campaign. One of King's final initiatives, the Poor People's Campaign, was carried out by the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, in his absence. The campaign, which King had planned as a mass movement to address poverty in America, culminated in a major demonstration in Washington, D.C. in May 1968. The protesters built a settlement on the National Mall known as Resurrection City, where they stayed for several weeks to draw attention to issues of economic inequality. Although the campaign did not achieve its immediate goals and was seen as less successful without King's leadership, it highlighted the economic dimensions of the civil rights struggle and kept King's vision of a society free from poverty alive. Number 11. Continued impact of his philosophy. Over the following decades, King's philosophy of nonviolent resistance continued to influence civil rights movements around the world. His commitment to justice and peaceful protest inspired movements against apartheid in South Africa, struggles for independence in colonies around the globe, and civil rights campaigns for oppressed groups. In the United States, King's legacy has been visible in the ongoing fight for racial equality and social justice. The African American community, along with other marginalized groups, continued to push for reforms in education, employment, voting rights, and criminal justice. The civil rights movement had evolved, but King's influence remained at its core, serving as a moral compass for activists. Number 12. The creation of Martin Luther King Jr. Day. King's impact became even more formalized with the establishment of a federal holiday in his honor. The idea of a national holiday for King began shortly after his assassination, with labor unions, civil rights groups, and political leaders advocating for its creation. However, the process faced significant opposition, especially from conservative politicians and critics who believed that a holiday for King would be too divisive. Finally, after years of debate, Martin Luther King Jr. Day was signed into law in 1983 by President Ronald Reagan, making it the third Monday of January each year. The first official observance was in 1986, and over time, all 50 states adopted the holiday. This national recognition of King's legacy marked a significant milestone in America's acknowledgement of the civil rights struggle and King's pivotal role in it. Number 13. The Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial. In 2011, King's legacy was further commemorated with the dedication of the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial in Washington, D.C., located on the National Mall between the Lincoln Memorial and the Jefferson Memorial. The centerpiece of the memorial is a massive granite statue of King, known as the Stone of Hope, carved by Chinese sculptor Lei Yixin. Surrounding the statue are walls inscribed with some of King's most famous quotes, including his call for justice, equality, and peace. The memorial serves as a permanent reminder of King's vision for America, reflecting his belief in nonviolence and his dream of a society free from racial injustice. Number 14. Legacy in contemporary movements. King's influence remains deeply embedded in modern movements for justice and equality. His strategies of peaceful protest and civil disobedience are echoed in contemporary movements such as Black Lives Matter, BLM, which emerged in response to systemic racism and police brutality against African Americans. BLM activists often invoke King's teachings, highlighting the continuity of the struggle for racial justice and the relevance of his message in the 21st century. King's focus on economic justice has also found resonance in ongoing debates about inequality in the U.S. and around the world. His speeches on poverty and economic disenfranchisement continue to inspire efforts to address wealth disparities, from movements advocating for a living wage to calls for health care reform and affordable housing. Number 15. King's family and the continued fight for civil rights. King's family, especially his wife, Coretta Scott King, played a significant role in keeping his legacy alive and expanding the scope of civil rights activism. Coretta Scott King became a leading voice for racial and gender equality. After her husband's death, she founded the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change in Atlanta, Georgia, which became a focal point for civil rights activism and the preservation of King's teachings. Coretta also campaigned for LGBTQ rights, believing that the struggle for civil rights extended to all marginalized groups. King's children have also been active in civil rights causes, with his son, Martin Luther King III, continuing to advocate for nonviolence and human rights. Number 16. Global legacy and influence. Internationally, King's legacy extends far beyond the United States. Leaders from Nelson Mandela to Desmond Tutu have cited King as an inspiration in their struggles against racial oppression in South Africa. His methods and ideals have been adapted by peaceful movements in India, Northern Ireland, and Eastern Europe, where people have fought for independence, democracy, and human rights. Martin Luther King Jr. is not just an American icon. He is regarded as a global symbol of the struggle for justice. His life's work stands as a testament to the power of moral leadership, courage, and unwavering commitment to equality. Conclusion. Martin Luther King Jr.'s life and legacy have left an indelible mark on the world. From his early days as a pastor in Montgomery to his leadership in the national civil rights movement, King was driven by an unshakable belief in the power of love, justice, and nonviolence. His speeches, writings, and actions continue to inspire new generations of activists, and his vision of a world free from hatred and injustice remains as relevant today as it was during his lifetime. Even decades after his death, Martin Luther King Jr. remains a towering figure in American history. His dream of a better, more just world still lighting the path for those who seek freedom and equality for all. Thank you for watching us. Like and subscribe if you love adventures.